Crisp morning. Time for a drive in my 330 America. So, in celebration of 1,000 subscribers to my YouTube channel, I figured it was time to kind of tell everybody who just found this this YouTube channel kind of how I got involved with all this stuff. You know, how do you start? You start from the beginning. I mean, I've always been a car guy. Always enjoyed cars, always messed around with them, always, you know, owned something. I mean, I think ever since I was in high school, I mean, I drove a 1966 Mustang Coupe in high school, and it kept going on from there. By the time I got to college, I bought traded the Coupe for a 65 Mustang Fastback 4-speed, which I still own today. I then got into British cars because I've always been into different cars. It wasn't just one marque. I kind of was intrigued by British cars, and ended up buying myself a Sunbeam Alpine, which I still have today, and tinkered with that for a few years. But ever since I was in high school, I was always a big Porsche guy. So I said to myself, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but one of these days I'm going to own a 911. And after I got out of school, I ended up buying a 911. I found back in those days, early what they call nowadays long hood 911s, which is pre-73 911s. I mean, these things were relatively expensive. I mean, they were $5,000, $6,000, $8,000 cars, but I managed to find one for $2,200. Of course, needed a little bit of work, but was able to get it together and even took it to the track. I joined Porsche Club and went on the track and enjoyed that kind of stuff with the 911. And all the while messing around with these cars, I was in college, went to art school. I went to Pratt in Brooklyn, and managed to get a job at CBS. Working early mornings, no one wanted the job because it was horrible hours. But I figured out how to do my classes in the afternoon and go to work early in the morning and be home back in Brooklyn by noon. Kind of burn the candle at both ends. But part of that also was how I was able to afford a couple of these cars. I mean, they weren't expensive back in the 80s and 90s, but late 80s, early 90s. But they were still, they still needed to make money, and I took a lot of my earnings from working at CBS to buy car stuff, and had the Mustang, I had the Sunbeam, I had the Porsche, and I was having a lot of fun. While working at CBS, I got a job working for Letterman. Letterman was coming to CBS from NBC, and I got put on the crew. I had some skills. I was a camera person at CBS by the time I was working for Letterman, but at the same time, I was also doing a lot of stuff in audio, and got them to hire me on the crew to do audio for Letterman, which was a challenge, and I really wanted to do it, and they took me on. So I joined the audio crew, and still worked on my cars on the weekends and all that stuff. Meanwhile, a mutual friend of mine who I was messing around with cars said, hey, we should go visit this guy, Francois Sicard, in Connecticut. He said, I heard that he just started working for Letterman, and you work for Letterman, so it'd be kind of funny to meet him. You know, I said, okay, well, that's interesting. So we went up to this shop in Ridgefield, Connecticut, and here was this shop that was hidden away, you know, in the backwoods, and opened the door, and there are a bunch of beautiful Ferraris in there. I mean, just stuff that I've never seen before. I mean, I thought Porsches were the coolest things in the world with the history, but then all of a sudden I see this car, and what it ended up being was a 250 short wheelbase, and I just was like, this is just gorgeous, this car. And at that moment, when he uncovered it and fired up the engine, and I heard the engine fire up, I just said, I don't know anything that's going on with this. This is a V12 engine, just sounds fantastic. I said, I got to figure out how to get one of these things. And the connection with Letterman was that Francois had been hired by Letterman because, you know, Francois in the New York area, if not you know, around the country, was a legend of you know, Ferrari knowledge. I mean, here's a gentleman that worked for Canetti Motors in New York, the main American importer, and he worked for NART. He was the North American Racing Team's, you know, chief mechanic, and did a lot of the racing back in the late 60s and 70s. All sorts of really neat stuff. And you know, here he is, you know, a guy in his, I think at that time he was in his 60s and 70s, and he was still doing it, but he was doing it in his private shop. And you know, Letterman had a car that he needed work on, and of course everybody says, you know, you need to go to Francois. Francois's the guy, you know. So Letterman ends up taking his cars to Francois, and they had just started, you know, a working relationship, and it was just, that was the entree into Francois's shop. I mean, just kind of saying, hey, it's funny, you and I both have the same boss. You know, I work for Letterman on his TV show, and you work for Letterman on his cars. But once the connection with the Ferraris happened, I was just, you know, I'm a car guy. I just found every excuse and every reason to go to Francois's shop. I'd call him up when I was in the area, or even if I wasn't in the area. I was like, hey, you know, I was wondering what you're doing today. Can I stop by? And I would go and see him and hang out and see what kind of cars he had in his shop. And there was always something interesting there. And he was pretty open about it. I mean, he was really nice. I mean, let me in and showed me stuff, and I was enthusiastic about it, and I just wanted to hear everything and learn as much as I could. And in those conversations, you know, I told him, you know, boy, I'd really like to get one of these things one day. And he said to me, look, you know, what you have to do is you need to find one of these cars that's completely disassembled. You know, people buy Ferraris all the time, and then what they do is they take them apart, and then they don't put them back together again, and that's the way you can get a cheap Ferrari, you know. And I said, okay, well that's interesting, and that's something to keep in mind. And he also had a GTE at the shop one day, and he said, hey, listen, let's take this car out for a drive. I'll show you what this is about. He goes, this is a great deal because, you know, he said this GTE is a wonderful car, and yet it has all the mechanicals of any vintage Ferrari. You know, it's got the same mechanicals as a short wheelbase, the car that I saw for the first time, and it has the same, you know, brakes and mechanicals, but the body is just the 2+2, and these things were just ended up not appreciating as much as the two-seaters. But he said, but these cars are great cars. So I took it out, drove it, and just like, wow, this is really good. So I started to set my sights on trying to find a 250 GTE project car that I could tinker with, because I still, you know, messed around with my cars all the time, and you know, said, look, I have some mechanical skills, maybe I can put it together myself. So I went and started looking. Well, one day, just out of the blue, I decided to pick up a Hemmings Motor News. Hemmings Motor News was a Bible of sorts of used cars. It's kind of like you know, how today everybody follows Bring a Trailer. Well, back in those days, everybody, you know, read Hemmings Motor News, and I found an ad for a 330 America, and showed Francois the ad, and called the guy up and said, hey, is this car real? I knew that it was rare, and I said, I'd really like to come down and see it. And he said, sure. So Francois and I went over what I should do as far as like inventory, like what was expensive, what I need to make sure we had, was the engine in one piece. And I drove down there and inventoried the car, and it was all there. I remember calling Francois and saying, hey, can I do you think I should buy this car? And he said, listen, if it's everything that's there, I think you need to buy the car. And I said to him, look, I can't do this by myself. You had said to me years ago that if I found the right car, that you would help me put it back together. Would you still do that? He goes, oh, absolutely. Just go get the car and we'll figure it out. So I went back, I think that evening, to the guy's house, because I was staying down in Roanoke to see the car. Drove all the way down to Roanoke and bought the car. We went back there about a month later, loaded it all up, brought the car back, and just started the process of putting this car back together. I had worked my schedule out at Letterman so that I could get Fridays off, because I had already had every Friday off, and every Friday I would like tinker with my cars, and that's how I ended up stopping by Francois, because on Fridays I would just go and hang out with him. And so I used to call it my Ferrari Fridays, because when I got the car back, I recognized that I needed to put this time into the car on a regular basis. So I worked on it every Friday for just about 8 years. I mean, I think in 8 years' time, of the time that it took for me to finally get the car on the road and driving, out of all the Fridays, I might have missed 6 or 7 of them. I mean, I really made sure that every Friday I was up there working on my car. And during that process of working with Francois, working with the upholsterer, working with the platers and all that stuff that Francois had introduced me to his suppliers and his vendors in restoring cars, I learned a lot about the business. And the other thing I learned about myself is I really liked it. I really liked doing the car stuff. And not only did I like doing it as a hobby, but I really enjoyed it as possibly doing it every day for a living. The other thing that happened was my background is media. I went to art school and had a degree in photography, and there was this thing called the World Wide Web. I realized that I should learn this because I, at that time, felt that the World Wide Web was basically going to be kind of like what cable television was. This established place to get entertainment, but cable television all of a sudden gave you like all these channels to look at, and that's kind of like how I looked at the World Wide Web. There's all these channels to look at, and I should really learn how to program for the World Wide Web. And I knew that at that time a lot of it was just pictures and story. Well, I can't learn something without doing. So I went ahead and said, well, this is perfect. I'm working on a car every week. I have pictures. I have these new digital cameras. I'm taking pictures of the car, and I have a story about what I did on my Ferrari Friday. So I started to write about it and posted on this website that my nephew, who was a computer science major, wrote the script for. So just so that I could easily put pictures and story up on my website. So as I started doing that, it started to get more and more notoriety, and people started to follow it on a regular basis. I started to find out that a lot of other people actually enjoyed reading about my weekly, antics or weekly discoveries and troubles on my Ferrari, and it became pretty popular, where people started contacting me through the world, throughout the world, and asking, hey, I've got a car, and I was wondering whether or not, Francois Sicard can work on it. Francois was working as a private shop. It was invitation only. No one knew about him except word of mouth. He wouldn't just accept you as a client unless, you knew someone that introduced you to him. And I started to ask Francois if he would be interested in working on some of these cars that were contacting me through the internet, of which he had no idea what the internet was, and I brought in a couple customers, and that kind of planted the seed in my head and said, this is very interesting. If I do this if I did this for a living, this would be my marketing. I mean, the internet was how I could get people to know what we did, and it shows the work that we did. So I kind of called it a soft sell, because it wasn't like you're out there saying, come to my shop, come do all this stuff, or come to Francois. It was just like, this is what we do, this is how we do it the way that we do it, this is what we think is the best way to do it, and people would say, wow, I would really like you to work on my car. So in the 8 years that I put my car together, I started to sit there and say, wait a minute, is this something that I might be able to do? Can I make this happen? I've been Letterman for 12 years. And I had just become a father, and my wife and I were living in New York City, and I looked at everything and said, I don't know, do I want to keep living and working in New York City? Do I want to keep doing this in television? I mean, I love my job. I love working for Letterman. It was an exciting job, but at the same time, what am I doing? I mean, where am I going to go? Like, what's the future? And I just loved working on the Ferraris all the time. So I just made the decision that I think I need to leave. It wasn't an easy decision. It wasn't something that I could just say, oh yeah, easy, I'm going to quit my job and try all this stuff. It was unknown. I didn't have a job. Francois never hired anybody to work for him. So it wasn't like I could just go to him and say, hey, listen, Francois, give me a job. I want to do this. I didn't even know if he would say yes. But everything kind of coalesced of, I worked on the car. I liked working on the car. Francois enjoyed, didn't mind me working at his shop. We did work on a couple of the customer cars that came in. I was kind of ready to leave Letterman. It wasn't that it was a bad show or anything like that. It was my life was moving on. I had a 2-year-old daughter that was really taking a lot of my time. The other part of it was that I had a home that was outside of the city that I used as a weekend home, and I'd wanted to live there instead of New York City. So I could sell my place in the city that I had bought when I first started working for Letterman, and sell that, and I could move up to the country, and I could commute down to Francois. And that's what I did. I said to him that I'd really like to work for you. I'll start a company and work for you as an outside contractor, and I will bring in work, and I will figure out the hours that I can use to do this stuff. And he agreed. So it's the same story. I kind of run my shop the same way that I did the way Francois does it, and it seems to work. I still collaborate with him. We still work together, but I have quite a bit of work here. Again, keep it simple. I'm by myself, and it works for me with just vintage Ferrari. I tell people that if it has a carburetor and it's a Ferrari, I'll work on it, but very rarely do I work on anything new. Generally, I try to stick with what I know. I don't need people to pay me to learn on their car. There are plenty of experts out there that know more about those other ones than I do, and I know what I know. I'm also very lucky. I'm working on exactly what I want to do, so it works for me. And I want to thank everybody for watching the YouTube channel that I created and subscribing. If you share and tell other people of like-minded people, then this community will grow. Kind of like the same thing I did with the website. Created a great vintage for our community, and I want to continue that on YouTube. I want to continue that with people who may not have known about what I did, and now see me here on YouTube and sharing that passion as well. So thank you everybody for subscribing. I look forward to meeting more of you and sharing this stuff that I have that I think is, I like it. I find it exciting, and I hope you do too. So keep watching, and thanks everybody. Talk to you soon.